Welcome to the Military Veteran Podcast. In the Military Veteran Podcast, we interview fantastic founders, investors, leaders, writers that are at the forefront of military veterans and how the post 9/11 veterans are reshaping the world and America. Today, we're fortunate to have Gene, who is a founder, a special forces operator, a West Point grad, a boxer, a writer, and I could go on and on. Gene, thank you so much for joining us. First question I have is, you have a book that's been very well received. Can you talk about the book?
Sure, Tim. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I recently launched a book in October called The Second Shot, A Green Beret's Last Mission. It was published by Amazon and released at the time. So the cornerstone kind of flagship story is around a family friend who was kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf terrorists in late 2013. A husband was killed during the abduction as well when they were vacationing in eastern Malaysia at Pom Pom Island. The serendipity was she was kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf terrorists that I was part of a larger operation during a deployment when I was there with U.S. Army Special Forces, where we failed to kill these three particular lieutenants. So I think it's a unusual story where, as a service member, that somebody that or groups of people that we were targeting during time in uniform actually came around in my personal life after I had actually already left the military and kidnapped somebody that I actually knew, right? And so to cut the story short, right, basically I was able to link up with Filipino Scout Rangers and NICA operatives. NICA is their CIA version, and essentially effect a kidnap and ransom operation where we were able to insert technical surveillance devices into the exchange materials and then vectored in the Scout Rangers to effectively destroy or disable most of that 80 Abu Sayyaf terrorist group. And so that's essentially the crux of the story. When we were writing the book, the editors basically kept on pulling out of the story, why did you go to the Philippines? Okay, now I have to explain that I was a U.S. Army Special Forces officer, first group being based out in Asia, and then had served time in the Philippines as well as Iraq, etc. I was also part of the Commanders in Extremis Force, which was the counter-terrorist unit, regional counter-terrorist units that are no longer in existence today. I was part of the team, part of the unit that was based in Okinawa and covered the Asia region. So I had a particular experience with hostage rescue and a bent towards that. Right, we were specialized in that skill set even within the Green Berets. So all of that background gets pulled out, and so when I talk about the book, I like to describe it as the serendipitous linkage of events of action reaction starting from my childhood that even led to a little bit of what I'd like to consider as an unusual road, even from my own background to West Point, to the Green Berets, my own experiences there, and then how it led to that. So I always like to tell people that after we got Evelyn Chang out, that's the family friend's name, I remember thinking to myself for a long time that I thought the entire purpose of my life was just to save her life, right? Because of how odd all the coincidental and serendipitous events and the twists and turns of the decisions of my own life led to essentially having the skills, knowledge, and abilities, and the availability, et cetera, to effect a successful operation.
There's more to unpack there, though. From what I understand, when you rescued Evelyn Chang, you became a celebrity in Taiwan, and somewhat your cover was blown, and there was a connection to the president. You want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's actually one of the big things, particularly for my Philippines friends. They're like, why is this story so big? Because there's kidnappings all the time in the Philippines, and particularly with Abu Sayyaf. At that time, I was the nephew of the sitting president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou. He's my sister's older brother. He came into the presidency in 2008, and while some members of my family are a little bit more public, my mother is not, and she's always kept a very, very low profile as the youngest sister. And so my identity as a West Pointer, as a U.S. Army Special Forces officer, et cetera, was completely unknown by the Taiwanese public. So Evelyn Chang's story was national news at the time. Taiwan, outside of the thousands of missiles that China's pointing at it, Taiwan is probably arguably one of the safest places in the world. And nothing like this happens to Taiwanese citizens. There's not even really a problem of violent crime in Taiwan at all. So for a story like this to break in the Taiwan news, it was literally nonstop on national news every single night while she was in captivity. And suddenly for this unknown nephew of the sitting president to bring her back and have the background that I have, if you might imagine, the people of Taiwan's minds kind of exploded around the story. You can imagine the equivalent of that happening in the States or Europe or something like that, right? An equivalent story. So anyway, so that created a lot more buzz, I would say, around it. And I was joking around that that being in Taiwan and walking around, it was kind of like 15 minutes of boy band fame, right? Of just walking down the street and people would be running out of cafes, take photos with me and things like that. That's why there's a lot more international headlines and kind of press around was because of the nature of our family background.
It feels like this is a combination of a Jessica Lynch story plus like a person that we didn't even know that was part of us, and so those confluence of events make it seem very like captivating if someone's in Taiwan. The other thing I find fascinating is you and I had a previous conversation where you talked about another West Pointer named Gus Lee impacting your decision to go to West Point. And he's a very well-known author among Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, and come full circle, you've written a book. Can you talk more about Gus Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. So, even just going back to my own adolescence, I think like a lot of kids, I had a lot of identity issues, a lot of self-confidence, self-esteem issues. I was going through a spell or a phase in my life where I was doing a lot of shoplifting in high school, and I particularly like shoplifting books. Okay, I just had this like entitled punk kind of attitude that knowledge should be free. Okay, why don't you pay for this? And I would just basically just steal books. Okay, and one day, I was at the bookstore and I saw a picture of like the book was flipped and it was just a picture of Gus Lee on the back, and I was like, oh wow, look, Asian guy, right? It was really rare. In the 90s, as you just mentioned, him being so famous around amongst Asian Americans, he's just especially at that time, one of the very few Asian American authors, and particularly a New York Times bestseller status type of writer, right? And so it being on the bookshelf, I picked it up, and it was a book called Honor and Duty, which is a semi-fictional account of his own experiences going to West Point in the 60s. And I remember when I read that book that I actually had never heard of West Point at that time, growing up in very liberal Northern California. I went to a public high school that actually restricted military recruiters onto campus because it was so liberal. I'm not even sure how that's legal, to be honest, when I think about it further. But that was the status at Monte Vista High School, actually down in Cupertino, and so I picked it up and then started reading it, and then just, it was one of the books I decided to shoplift and took it home, and I just read it cover to cover like in 1 or 2 days. And I remember thinking, what an amazing place, but I thought it was fictional, like kind of like Hogwarts for warriors rather than wizards. And because I was a competitive tennis player, I was being recruited by schools around the country, and West Point being a Division I college as well, reached out, and I realized, oh my God, this place is real. And I started getting really, really interested about applying. And so, yeah, kind of a happenstance. I talk about the serendipity of events, and actually in all our lives, we can probably tie this all together, but I always like to think about it in the context of my own. So I think about that of just randomly shoplifting Gus Lee's book, Honor and Duty, and that was the catalyst or the influencing moment why or where I started thinking about attending West Point. Right.
I oftentimes don't associate a bibliophile with, I think, a kleptocrat. And I think the kleptocrat is the one who's tend to steal stuff.
I like to think the klepto side. I would like to say that I definitely do not steal things today, but especially as a Green Beret later, like these are actually funny enough, the sort of skills that are actually celebrated in Special Forces, whereas as a U.S. Army armor officer, I mean, go to jail, some of the things and the type of attitude and thinking that you have in the Green Berets. But I forgot to tie off my answer to one great point that you brought up, Tim, was that, I think that for myself, having become a writer and shared some of my experiences over the last several years, what's kept me going a bit, especially as I get older and am much more protective of my privacy every single year. I do share my story because there's been more than a handful of folk that have reached out, of the next generation upcoming, and telling me about how my writing or my stories or my profile inspired them to either apply to West Point or join the military and things like that. And this just comes in more and more. And I realize that, in a way, it's like paying it forward, like the way Gus Lee influenced myself, and it sounds like you as well, that, somewhere in between, I'm a bridge now of the next generation, I'm repeating myself, but the next generation as well, and so that gives me a great sense of fulfillment. It helps me kind of move past the kind of like the anxiety and the embarrassment even of having my personal life exposed to the public, right?
Well, your journey has been incredible, and it's been one of just growth, because from reading some other articles about you, you talk about being bullied, and then you talk about the article talked about at West Point. It was very difficult at first, but you talk through that journey,
sure.
please.
Look, I was like the worst plebe, Tim. I mean, like, I literally showed up. I'm one of those guys that showed up and didn't know anything about the Army, right? I thought the Army was just this, like, annoying thing you had to do after you got to go to West Point, right? Like, I didn't show up to West Point like a lot of people who, maybe even from a young childhood, their dream was to be a U.S. Army officer, right? To me, the U.S. Army was an annoying thing, almost like a chore, a penance that you had to do after West Point. So when I showed up, I didn't even know the difference between like a captain and a sergeant, like I didn't know anything. And so it was just very out of place for me, and I got hazed nonstop. I mean, I was I had kind of like a malinger's attitude, even when I go to West Point reunions now and my plebe class that was close with in my company, I'm always like apologizing to them for being such a bad plebe and a bad teammate, at the time. And I promised them that I've changed, over the years, and especially as an officer, et cetera. But yeah, everything felt out of place and unnatural for me. I remember being the very last person to qualify on basic rifle marksmanship out during wherever that was on the pop-up targets. They made me wear I wore glasses at the time and had the birth control glasses. I can't remember what they're called, but the BCGs, right? And classically, because cadets are teaching other cadets and don't know anything about shooting or anything, frankly, about any skills as being a soldier, I'm left eye dominant, okay, but I'm right-handed. And so at the time, right, people didn't understand, well, if you're left eye dominant or cross-eye dominant, right, you should just learn how to shoot with your left hand. It's a lot easier just to move your finger up and down and pull a trigger versus teaching your eyes to be different dominants, which it's not possible, right? So instead they had me wear like duct tape or white tape over my left eye, like just constantly walking around. I'm like basically blind now in one eye, walking around, just like falling on myself, leaving my rifle here. I was already bad at everything, but it's just now like you just took away one of my eyes, right? So I'm like the very last plebe to qualify, and I remember actually, I think I even had to go the next day, and then that just attracts more and more hazing and just more and more shunning, from your peers, etc. I failed land navigation. I mean, I can go on and on. I remember the end of plebe year, and it's the only time I remember seeing that we got our grades this way, or maybe it just sticks out so much in my memory. But I remember seeing that I was militarily ranked last in the class. Like it literally told you like 1199 out of 99. 1199, right? I was literally last. And now it helps, quote unquote. My last name is Yu, right? So it's alphabetical. So I'm sure I had the same grade as a whole bunch of people. But since I'm alphabetically last, I'm actually last in the ranking, right? But it left a very, very strong impression on me about how low I was in the class from that aspect. And that was the start of my military career, of just realizing I was at the very, very bottom against all of my peers. Right? Yeah.
So this podcast today is like a podcast amongst two West Point grads who were terrible as new cadets. Everything you described, I had that, and I can completely relate to it. What though is really cool about your career is you go the special forces route, and then not only that, but then you rescue Evelyn Chang, not even in uniform. And now what's really interesting is you continue to progress and grow, and now you're building Blackpanda. Can you talk about your journey into Blackpanda and what does Blackpanda do and how is it going?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. Maybe I can even just share a few things, just along that theme of your question, right? I think that I've discovered for myself, right, and I hope that this is useful for listeners and just anybody who cares to learn more about my story. I love this British educational term that they refer to as delayed velocity, right? Which is the idea that some people just don't move as fast in the earlier stages when they're learning things, but they pick up the velocity on the back end a lot faster. And I've always looked at like myself as that type of learner. Once I heard that term, or I realized I was like that before I heard the term, but then it really spoke to me when I heard that as well, that I fit that category, right? I failed a lot of courses, even in the U.S. Army and in elsewhere. But when I came back or got a second chance to do it, because I'd been through it the first time, I aced it the second time. You know what I mean? And I'm talking like really difficult schools, right? Like, for example, the STAR exam, the land navigation exam at the Special Force Qualification course, or whether it be SEER school, these sort of things. Is that I was able to pick it up on the back end, right? And so we talk about my start at being at the very bottom of West Point militarily, but when it came around to the first time, if you recall, during our officership, the first time that you actually can move ahead of your peers is promotion to major, where there's the first step of what we call below the zone, and it's less than 1% of officers in the class get selected for below the zone, and particularly in special forces, right? And so I was there's only 8 other along with me, and that was probably my proudest achievement, right? Because at the end of the day, all the cadet stuff that we were doing, seriously was just games, right? Like, this is the real deal. Not only just in real line units, but in combat, right? This is 4 combat tours later. I'm a Commanders in Extremis Force team leader as one of the, regional counterterrorist operators, on the forefront of the cutting edge of special forces. And this is a guy that couldn't even qualify on basic rifle marksmanship, and I've graduated from the highest levels of close quarter combat schools, as well as sniper school, like all these sort of things that the levels I've gone to inside of special forces beyond so far well and above and beyond, right? And so when you asked me about the question, which is that journey of delayed velocity, I just wanted to just cover that off, for listeners. I think that's probably, if I'd say, like the most value of my story is just like how wherever that you're at is that there's still that room to continue going forward, and that if you just keep on plugging at it and stay focused on what your objective is and continue iterating and trying to find the solutions. I mean, you either win or you learn, that classic cliche, but it really is, and that's played over into Blackpanda for me as well, right? I'm 10 years into this journey. We're about $30 million US in on venture capital now. Singtel, which is the largest telco out here in Singapore, is our lead investor. Cybersecurity company that's combined my background in crisis response, as I'm just talking about my counterterrorist background. I've got a little bit of technical background because I was a computer science undergrad, and I was an early guy at Palantir back in 2012, 2013. And combined it a bit with my finance background. I was a Credit Suisse investment banker for a period of time, and I tied it together to build a cybersecurity insurance company. So Blackpanda is a Series A plus stage company. We're headquartered in Singapore. I have offices in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Manila. Just opened an entity in San Francisco, and then we're entering into Australia later this year. So still in the journey. We're still early and still figuring out a lot of things, and a lot of ups and downs along the way of doing this for the last 10 years. But it's all part of, I guess, as you mentioned, my growth story and things that I keep on taking on, and just trying the next challenge and the bigger one, the next step to the next, right?
Delayed velocity reminds me of a phrase I like to say a lot, and that is success is a lagging indicator. Like, especially with startups. But I also see it with my own kids, is that you put in the work and there will be not just days, not just months, not just quarters, but years until you actually see the results.
Right.
The other thing is, I feel like some of those early hardships help steal your resolve and give you that inner confidence that you can't get anywhere else unless you actually, to your point, you either win or you learn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what the whole Army experience taught me as well, right? Like when I look at Beast, right, which is our boot camp summer before we matriculate as plebes or freshmen at West Point. I mean, that was the hardest experience for me to get through, right? I never really got to the point that I thought I was going to quit. I think my Asian sense of shame would never allow me to actually quit, right? But it was, I mean, it almost broke me. Like I did so badly during Beast and blisters all over my feet. I was failing like all the physical exams as well. But when I look back now, I mean, Beast is a joke, like compared to what I went through at Ranger School, at special, in the Q course, everything that I did in terms of all the schoolings and everything like that. But it's building blocks, right? Because each time you go through these crucibles, you get a bit stronger, right? Or a bit tougher, a bit smarter, a bit wiser, wilier. And it's this building blocks that you can build on bit by bit. But if you try to take it all and bite off more than you can chew right from the onset, then your fall can be quite precipitous, right? But if you can build it up step by step and just take it inch by inch, so to speak, I think that's essentially the castle that you're building, right? That you're going to stand on, throughout your life. So, it sounds like we're pretty aligned in terms of the thinking around that, and that's how I kind of approach things, at Blackpanda as well, right? Is that, I try to keep my feet on the ground. You know what I mean? Like, just build this company step by step, and then, not trying to rush things. Hopefully in a little bit of wiser status, a little bit older these days. Of not trying to be overly ambitious and rush too fast out there, but just build it step by step. And yeah, I mean, gosh, sometimes I joke around with people like, I can't believe they let me do this job. Like every month or every 2 months, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't know that. Learning something that something that I'm supposed to know, running this company, right? Yeah.
So much of the military and what you described is applicable to entrepreneurship in the sense of it's always easy the second time around. And the beautiful thing is entrepreneurship gives you many times to redo something. So, hey, the first time I sold this product, it really didn't work. The first time I demoed this product, it didn't work. But guess what? There are many other chances to prove your opportunity and your worth.
Yeah, I love that, Tim. I'd love to bring an analogy back over to a lifelong passion for me as well has been jiu-jitsu, right? So I've been training about 30 years, black belt, blah, blah. So one of the things that I obsess about with now, and I have been for the last several years, is just focusing and on one area of jiu-jitsu, like literally even down to just one move, right? And for the entire year, right, I'll just dedicate and be like, for 12 months, I'm only going to try to submit people with this one move. That's it. But because I'm so hyper-focused on just this one space, that every time I attempt it, or even just the moves to set it up, I'm seeing every permutation or iteration possible of defenses coming up, and I will lose at times and be unsuccessful, and maybe even put myself in such a compromised position that I get tapped out, right, even by lower belts, etc. But every single time, I'm seeing every single thing that could possibly happen, and then I'm cataloging and figuring out what I need to do to address those situations, to the point that after about this lengthy period of 12 months, because I have struggled against this one problem over and over and over in every single different angle, I have at that point technically mastered and defeated all the different little things and have an answer to everything that could possibly happen, right? So I like thinking of that, that analogy as well for entrepreneurship. When we talk about, I think what you're alluding to as well is probably the most obvious one is just in terms of trying to find product market fit, right? And going out there and just hammering the market over and over with the same thing, but then adjusting it based off market feedback, et cetera, and iterating and failing fast as quickly as you can and coming around it with a different angle. But that whole spirit of how you approach product market fit also exists in every other aspects of the company, right? Like, like recruiting, right? Like figuring out the process of how to try to find the people that work well inside your organization, work well with you, right? everything from even just the infrastructure for finance operations and like, screwing up on payroll and figuring out like that you need to get this right. It's just so many different aspects of needing to make sure you have that type of spirit and that, frankly, that grit that you can handle that high volume and repetitive nature of failure just over and over and over, right? I always like to say that, I think that true confidence comes from knowing that you know how to operate in the space after failure, right? Knowing that you have a plan, like you actually have a structure or a schema in your head that this is how I address failure. This is how I'm going to diagnose the problem, identify root cause, design a solution, and then this is how I'm going to execute it as well, right? Backwards timeline planning, et cetera, and then just knock it out every single time. And when you have a framework like that and have the confidence to know how to operate in the space after failure, that's actually what I think gives true confidence in terms of going forward and taking on bigger and bigger challenges, right?
In order to that point, I believe that if you want to be able to sell a $200,000 deal, you have to first be able to sell that 50,000, that 100,000, that 200,000, and you have to have failed a few times at those, so that like by the time you're selling a $200,000 deal, it's like, this is natural, and I've got the confidence, and I know, to your point around jiu-jitsu, I know all your objections, and I have a counter to this. I know just how to approach that. The other analogy to jiu-jitsu and entrepreneurship, first is, I don't know jiu-jitsu worth anything, so that's that. But I have taken a few like intro classes, and the very first thing they teach you at jiu-jitsu is how to fall. And that is so important to entrepreneurship, right? Like how you fall, you have to put your chin on your chest. Otherwise, you hit the head with your ground, game over. You're out of conscious. You can't fight. You can't think. Done. And that's the same for entrepreneurship. The only thing that is really important is that you have to have cash and capital. That's like that's the only kind of thing around entrepreneurship that is a no-fail thing. Thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, cash is the lifeblood of the company. I was referring to the other day to people about, people are, or especially in the early days of the company, people were like, oh, where's our career progression? And like, where's this and that? And I'm like, we live at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. We're at the place where we're struggling for like air and like water and food. Okay. Which is cash. Right. And the things you're talking about are on the higher end of like things like art and music, things like that. Like we need to worry about food and water right now and survival and like against like animals, out in the jungle. And so it's about prioritization when it comes around to like in the aspects of lifeblood. When I think about your analogy about being able to fall correctly, I think it comes back around to the aspect of, again, knowing how to operate after failure, right? Because you're going to run into failure like almost, it feels oftentimes like every single minute, of the day, at times, right? But again, knowing, that number one, there's never going to be an end to the problems, right? That's not how life works, right? The game is not, we're going to solve all the problems in our life and then we win, right? We just solve each problem as they come up, one after another, and again. So when I hear about people complaining about like having so many problems, I mean, like, what were you expecting? Like, do you think, and what do you think is going on with everyone else around you, right? I don't care who you are, how successful you are, your life is hard. You have a lot of problems that you're dealing with all the time, right? Everybody is a chaotic, kind of carnival of emotions going on, behind our, hopefully, calm demeanors. And, so entrepreneurship is no different from that. And it seems like it'd be a larger onslaught of problems, but we're just dealing with each one after another. I like to these days to make a little bit of analogy as well to my company about how I feel like oftentimes what we're doing is playing a video game, right? And I like using Super Mario Brothers. It's like we have a certain number of lives and we just need to run through this thing and figure out like where you die, right? And then reboot. You get another life and run it again, right? Oh, okay, I can't jump on these like Venus fly traps. Okay, you die when that happens. Oh, if I fall through this hole, okay, I die, et cetera. But, and there's a certain amount of time, which is probably limited by the amount of cash you have, but also other factors as well. But you do have multiple lives. And so the faster that you run through this game and figure out where the landmines and the pitfalls are, the faster you might be able to clear the level, right? And so, it's another aspect I think about, in terms of entrepreneurship or just just being in a startup, right? Of how fast you need to move and try to find those problems, and then to know to navigate around them, right? The next time around.
I think a lot of interviewing can feel like to use a West Point term, a dog and pony show. But the question I really like to ask and listen to people respond to is, tell me a time that you failed and how did you respond? Just because it is so important to see, to your point, how can you act and do you have a plan after failure happens?
Right.
Back to Blackpanda, what are some opportunities that you're really looking forward to exploring, testing, running experiments on this year?
Yeah. So I was just talking about this with my CFO just now. So the most exciting thing going on at Blackpanda right now is that we think we're cracking the code of how to attach our cyber insurance product to data broadband with telcos, right? So we are, that's the reason why we're invested in by Singtel. For the U.S. listeners will not know this, but Singtel is one of the largest telco companies here in Asia broadly, even though Singapore is a small country, right? They own 5 of some of the biggest telcos around in Asia, including Airtel in India, which is the biggest out there, Telkom, biggest in Indonesia, Globe, biggest in Philippines. It just goes on and on. They're just massive giant, right? And so
Singtel is the Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile, Southeast Asia. I think that's a pretty good analogy.
I think that's a pretty good analogy. Yeah, it's a beast, right? And what they saw, and they invested in us because we're doing this with Singtel, right? Of taking our product and distributing it with them. And just very briefly for the listeners, what we developed essentially is like AAA roadside assistance for cybersecurity, right? You pay us a fixed flat fee. Very, very inexpensive, as a company, and then basically 24/7 will come and put out the fire in case you get cyber attacked. And so because it's so inexpensive, but the value is outsized, right, in terms of saving somebody in a crisis, it's inexpensive enough to be attached with data broadband itself, right? The internet is coming with a security infrastructure organically, right? And that's really exciting. We've got some big deals on the table with some of the biggest telcos in the region right now. Singtel, of course, we've already launched. MacroView HCC, which is the second largest telco in Hong Kong, is launching with us this quarter. Globe, biggest in the Philippines, also launching in Q2, et cetera. We're in late stage negotiations with SoftBank up in Japan. All sorts of stuff like this is ongoing. And when I bring up this to answer your question, what's exciting about this is that it's the nature of Asia being so early in cybersecurity that there's this opportunity with telcos, right? Like in the US, this doesn't happen because the US market is so mature with cybersecurity providers, service providers, et cetera. There's no space for telcos to be really thinking or playing in this space, right? And what Asia, it's so early, right, and so wide open, the telcos are actually experimenting in, it's kind of like that leapfrog kind of phenomenon, right? When you're behind, that for somehow you can kind of like cut the line and get ahead. You know what I mean? And that's the funny thing for me is because I've actually been frustrated the last few years, which has been like, it's in such a backwater market out here, right? Like, I literally am still going into some meetings and explaining what cybersecurity is, to major partners to try to get deals going. And comparatively, when I'm in the States, like for example, obviously at RSA where everybody's in cyber, but even outside of that, just talking even just the common person who's outside of cyber, they know a lot more than the average person out here, right? But now I'm starting to think that actually this telco opportunity may be a unique attribute of the landscape out here because it's behind, and could be a big game changer for us in terms of our trajectory. So whether it happens or not, to be honest, is neither here nor there. It's just when you ask me like what's exciting and what's on our plate right now that I'm looking at, it's really a telco bias strategy of distributing cybersecurity versus the traditional methodology, which is through channels and managed service providers, et cetera, right?
So much to unpack there. First is that when I think of insurance, I think the most sticky insurance is the one that you have to get when you get a car, when you get a home.
Yes.
When you have a kid, you get life insurance, right? Those are like seminal moments, and it feels like it feels like the internet is so important. Cyber is so important that if you're going to deliver that product, you also probably should have some type of insurance with it. Yeah. Observation 1. Observation 2, which is more of a question, and that is, so are you selling the insurance to the telco, and then the telco is passing on those fees to their customers, or how does that work? And there's an element to bundling, it sounds.
Yes. So what we're working on right now, and the deal proposition is for us to be hard bundled with the actual data broadband offering. So direct internet access, DIA, is the easier pot to go after rather than just all data broadband to start, right? So DIA are customers that have higher requirements for higher bandwidth piping, right? And so they're already willing to pay more than the average company for data broadband. So it can get as high as up to like 50, 75,000 US dollars a year, right? So you add in our product, which starts as low as $1 US, device per month, right? And suddenly you can get really, really aggressive as a telco to increase their ARPU, right? Their average revenue per user, which they're always struggling with because their margins are so thin. They have a major market differentiator now against their competitors because their data broadband is quite a commodity, right? Like, it's nothing really that special about providing data broadband, right? But then now it's also a lead generation platform for the Asian telcos because they actually do sell cybersecurity products and services like managed service providers. And all these things are kind of coming together for telcos being, whoa, this is actually really differentiating and something that is finally inexpensive enough but valuable enough that I could actually attach to data broadband. So in this case, to answer your question, right, is what we're working on is for them to create like a branded secure broadband or an emergency response broadband version that basically for a marginal amount of money additionally that the customer can say, hey, do I just want broadband with nothing or broadband with internet firefighters and police that come with it, right, that are now on 24/7 standby, 4-hour notice, and they'll be at my door to help me deal with crime or a fire, right? So that's what we're excited about launching later this year and see how it goes in the market.
Gene, this has been an incredible conversation. It was fascinating to learn about your journey from books to West Point, to that difficult time at West Point, to Special Forces, from Special Forces to Blackpanda. Your growth through that time has been incredible. Obviously, you wrote about it a little bit in The Second Shot, which I highly recommend people pick up. More importantly, it's going to be fascinating, and we're cheering for your success beyond at Blackpanda and beyond. Thank you so very much for joining us.